The Valliere Files. Episode 2. The Disappeared. Previously in Sombremont, Detective Inspector Élise Vallière arrived to investigate the death of 17-year-old Céline Moreau, found at the forest's edge with her throat torn out. The village wanted to call it a wolf attack. Élise called it murder, and proved it. Local man Henri Laurent confessed to holding the girl down while the forest took payment, believing he was maintaining an ancient pact between Sombremont and the Forest of Mères-Ombres. Laurent is awaiting trial. Élise is still here, and the forest is still watching. Asterisk. Cold open. The camera on Werner Schmidt's phone was cheap but steady. She'd been filming since they'd parked the car. The trailhead, the view of the valley, her husband of 22 years adjusting his backpack straps with the focused expression he always got before a hike. Werner Schmidt at 45 was not a handsome man, but he was a solid one. Reliable. The kind of man who serviced his car on schedule and knew the weather forecast for any city he was visiting. 2 hours, he said, not looking at the camera. Maybe 2.5. I'll call when I'm back at the trailhead. Werner, it's not a race. I know it's not a race, Cotrin. I'm wearing appropriate footwear. I have water. I have the trail map on my phone and a paper backup because you never trust just one system. He finally turned toward her, and there was the familiar smile. Small, slightly exasperated, entirely affectionate. It's a forest trail, not the Himalayas. The locals said. The locals said many things. They also said the village fountain water cures arthritis. He patted her hand. 2 hours. I'll be back before lunch. He walked toward the trail marker at the edge of the forest, a simple wooden post with a carved arrow, slightly weathered. He turned once at the tree line. Waved. She filmed that wave. She didn't know why. Something made her want to document it. He disappeared between the trees. Cotrin stopped filming and went back to the car to wait. She waited 2 hours. Then 3. Then she called Werner's phone. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She went to find Capitaine Renault. 3 days later, Werner Schmidt walked out of the Forêt de Mères-Ombres onto the D14 main road. He was alive. He was upright. He was walking. But the man who walked out of that forest was not the man who had walked in. Élise heard about it at 7 in the morning from Julien, who'd stopped by the hotel with 2 coffees and the expression of someone who had seen something they couldn't explain. German tourist, he said. Werner Schmidt. Went into the forest on Tuesday morning. Missing persons report filed when he didn't come back by evening. We organized 2 search parties over 3 days. Forest Service, volunteers, dogs. Nothing. And now he's back. Walked out onto the D14 around 6 a.m. Driver almost hit him. Said he was disoriented but unharmed. Where is he now? Dr. Rousseau's clinic. His wife is with him. And Élise. Julien hesitated over her first name, still not comfortable with it after 2 weeks. There's something wrong with him. I don't mean injured. I mean something else. Élise took the coffee and her coat. Show me. The waiting room of Amelie's clinic held Cotrin Schmidt, who was a compact German woman in her mid-40s, with steady hands and the look of someone who had been frightened for 3 days and was now running on the residual adrenaline of relief that hadn't quite arrived. She spoke French with a confident accent. They were on their 4th day of a planned 2-week tour of the Auvergne region. He's in with the doctor, Cotrin said. She won't let me stay in the room. She says she needs quiet for the examination. That's standard procedure, Élise said, sitting across from her. When did you last speak to your husband? Before he went into the forest. At the trailhead. maybe 9 in the morning. Cochrane's hands were wrapped around a paper cup. He was completely normal. We'd had breakfast at the hotel, made jokes about the local wine. He was Werner, completely Werner. And when he came back, Cochrane looked at her steadily. He didn't know me. Not at first. He looked at me like he was trying to place a face he'd seen a long time ago. The shock, perhaps. He called me Liebling, Cochrane said quietly. Darling, in German. He always calls me Liebling. It's a habit, after 22 years. But the way he said it, not like he was greeting me, like he was remembering me, like he was speaking to someone who wasn't quite there. Amelie's door opened. The doctor's expression was professionally calm in the way it got when she was containing something larger. Inspecteur. A word. In the examination room, Werner Schmidt sat on the table in a hospital gown, looking at his own hands. He was doing this very carefully, turning them over, examining the knuckles and the veins with the attention of someone who has noticed something unexpected. He was not 45 years old. Or rather, his body was not 45 years old. Élise had been a detective for 12 years and had learned to register details quickly and without distortion. What she registered about Werner Schmidt was this: grey hair where the photographs in his wallet showed brown, deep lines around his eyes and mouth that weren't present in the photos his wife had shown them, hands that were weathered and spotted in ways that took decades to develop, a posture that was still straight but had the particular settled quality of someone who had long since stopped trying to stand tall. He looked 65, possibly older. M. Schmidt, Élise said. I'm Detective Inspecteur Valliere. I need to ask you some questions. He looked up. His eyes were clear, blue, sharp, entirely present. Whatever had happened to his body, his mind seemed intact. Of course, he said. His French was careful, slightly formal. Though I'm not sure how much I can tell you. I remember very little. Start with what you do remember. After you entered the forest. Werner's gaze went slightly unfocused, in the way of someone trying to retrieve a memory that keeps slipping. The trail, he said. It was well marked at first. Trees were impressive. Very old. I was enjoying it. A pause. Then the light changed. That's the only way I can describe it. Not darker, exactly. Softer. Like when clouds come over the sun, but you haven't noticed the clouds. Did you leave the marked trail? No. I don't think so. The trail was there. I was following it. Another pause. Longer. Then I was sitting at the base of a very large tree. A oak. Much larger than any oak I've ever seen. I don't know how I got there. I thought I'd perhaps fainted, but I didn't feel faint. I felt calm. Rested. How long did you think you'd been sitting there? Minutes. Perhaps 20 minutes. The light was the same. He looked at his hands again. But when I stood up and found my way back to the road, it was 3 days later. And my body. He seemed to struggle for words. My body has apparently lived more time than I have. Élise made careful notes. When you were at the base of the tree, do you remember anything? Sounds? Anything you saw? Something moved across his face. A rapid expression, there and gone, that she might have missed if she hadn't been watching closely. Dreams, he said finally. I think I was dreaming. But while awake, I saw the forest as it had been, a very long time ago. No trails, no clearings for villages, just trees in every direction. And I felt. He shook his head. Very small. and very old, at the same time. Does that make sense? Not in terms I'm used to, Élise said honestly. But I'm writing it down. Amélie pulled her aside in the hallway. The aging is real, Amélie said, keeping her voice below the threshold of the thin clinic walls. Not prosthetics, not illness, not stress response. His cells have aged. His telomere length is consistent with someone in their mid to late 60s. His bone density, his skin collagen, his eye pressure, all of it points to someone who has lived approximately 20 additional years. Élise stared at her. That's not possible. I know. There has to be an explanation. I'm sure there is. I just don't have it yet. Amélie folded her arms. I've sent samples to Lyon for full analysis. I've written up the case as fully as I can. But Élise. She looked at her steadily. We've had 3 other cases in my 5 years here that I've never been able to explain medically. I keep files on all of them. Werner Schmidt just became number 4. What were the other 3? 2 people who came back from the forest with no memory of time passing but no physical changes. One who came back physically fine but with total personality shift, spoke differently, had different knowledge, different skills. Like he'd been someone else and become himself again. She hesitated. The old families weren't surprised by any of them. Renault wasn't surprised. The pattern exists. Élise thought about the church records Père Guillaume had shown her. The patterns going back centuries. The forest has thin places, she said slowly. It wasn't a question. I don't know what it has. I just know what the evidence shows. Amélie paused. There's something else. Werner's wife says he's been saying things. In his sleep, and sometimes while awake. Fragments. In a language she doesn't recognize. Which language? She doesn't know. She described it as rough-sounding. Old. Like nothing she'd ever heard. Élise thought of the children who would disappear in episode 5, a story she didn't know yet. She thought of the symbols in the church crypt, the carved figures on the trees. Something old lived in that forest, something with its own language. She went to find Capitaine Renault. He was at his desk, doing paperwork with the concentrated efficiency of a man who used administrative tasks to avoid conversations he didn't want to have. He looked up when Élise entered and didn't look surprised to see her. The German tourist, he said. Werner Schmidt, aged 20 years in 3 days. Élise sat down without being invited. I need you to tell me about the other cases. What other cases? The ones Amélie has files on. The people who've come back from the forest changed. The ones who've disappeared and returned with time missing. The pattern. Renault set down his pen. For a long moment he just looked at her, that weighing look she'd come to recognize, calculating how much to tell her and what it would cost him. There have been 11 documented cases in the time I've been here, he said finally. 30 years. People who entered the forest and experienced temporal anomalies. Temporal anomalies. Such a clinical phrase for something that defied biology. And before your time? The church records document similar events going back to the founding of the village. Every generation. Sometimes more frequently, sometimes less. He picked up his pen again, set it down. The forest is old, Valliere. Older than our understanding of physics. Older than our definitions of time. The old families call it the dreaming. When the forest is dreaming, its time and our time don't match up cleanly. You believe this. I believe what I've seen. And I've seen enough to stop looking for conventional explanations. He met her eyes. You solved the Moreau case. You did good work. But Werner Schmidt isn't a crime. It's a phenomenon. And phenomena like this one get closed as unsolved, get closed as unexplained. There's a difference. Not for Werner Schmidt's family there isn't. Élise stood. He went into the forest as a healthy 45-year-old man and came out as an old one. Someone or something did that to him. And whether it's supernatural or some technology or some environmental anomaly, I don't understand. I want to know why. Because you don't like unanswered questions. Because unanswered questions are the ones that get someone else killed next time. She left before he could respond. Back at the hotel, she spread out what she had. The thin places, that was what the old families called them, according to Julian, who'd grown up hearing the vocabulary of the pact without fully understanding it. Places where the forest's rules applied more strongly, where time was permeable. But thin places weren't random. The church records she'd read, the patterns Père Guillaume had shown her, they all pointed to specific locations. The clearing near the old mill, a section of the northern trail at a certain elevation, the area around the largest trees. Specific places, which meant someone had mapped them, and someone had put Werner Schmidt in one of them. She called Julian. The search parties, she said. 3 days of searching. Dogs, Forest Service, volunteers. They found nothing. Right. No trace. The Forest Service was baffled, said it was like he'd simply stopped existing in the area. Where did they search? Northern sector mostly. That's where the trail he was following leads. What about the southern sector? Near the old mill. A pause. They didn't search there. The Forest Service won't go near the old mill area. There's an unofficial boundary. They call it a safety zone. Unstable ground, they say. Or a thin place. Silence on the line. Julian. Werner Schmidt wasn't found wandering in the northern sector. He came out on the D14. Where does that road run? She heard him checking. Then, south sector, about 2 kilometers from the old mill. So he entered from the north and exited from the south. Over 3 days. Through the middle of a 47,000-hectare forest. She paused. He didn't walk that. Not in 3 days of whatever state he was in. What are you saying? I'm saying someone moved him, or something moved him, from where he was to where he came out. But why? That was the question. You didn't move someone through a forest and return them physically aged unless you wanted something, unless the movement served a purpose. Who benefits from Werner Schmidt being in a thin place? I don't understand the question. In the Lauron case, Henri Lauron used the ritual deliberately. He put Céline in a position where the forest would take her because he wanted her taken. Is there someone who might want Werner Schmidt aged, weakened, disoriented? He's a tourist. He has no connection to the village, to the families. That we know of. Élise looked at her notes. Or he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the forest equivalent of catching a disease. He wandered near a thin place and got caught. The forest doesn't choose randomly, Julian said quietly. That's what my grandmother used to say. The mothers don't take without reason. If Werner Schmidt aged in the forest wanted something from him. What could an elderly tourist from Stuttgart have that the forest wants? Silence again. Then Julian said, his years. She went back to the clinic that afternoon. Werner was awake, sitting up, eating soup with the careful attention of a man discovering his body's capabilities after illness. Cochrane was beside him, holding his hand, occasionally looking at him with an expression that mixed relief and grief, the expression of someone who got back what they lost, but not entirely as it was. Élise sat down across from them. "I need to ask you something, M. Schmidt, and I want you to think carefully before answering." She looked at him steadily. "Before you went into the forest, did anything strange happen? Did anyone approach you? Give you anything, food, water, directions?" Werner's soup spoon paused. He looked at his wife, then back at Élise. "There was a woman," he said. Cochrane turned sharply. "You didn't mention." "I forgot. I forgot many things, and this was small. At the trailhead. An old woman. Very old. She was sitting on a stone, just sitting there, which seemed odd, so far from the village." He frowned, reconstructing. "She said something to me. In French. About the forest." "What did she say?" "My French is good, but not perfect. She said something like, 'The forest remembers everyone who enters. No one leaves without leaving something behind.'" He looked uncertain. "I thought it was local color. A folk tale warning." I smiled and thanked her and went in. "What did she look like?" "Old. Very white hair. Dark eyes. She had something in her hands, a carved figure. She was turning it over and over. 3 women." Élise felt cold. "Les Mères. Did she give you anything? Ask you anything?" "No. Just the warning. And then," he paused, "she said my name. I don't know how she knew my name. I had my pack on, nothing with my name visible, but she said it clearly. Werner Schmidt. Like she knew me." Élise wrote everything down. Then she said, "One more question. How do you feel? Not physically. Otherwise." Werner considered the question seriously, the way she'd begun to notice Germans often did, with genuine thought rather than reflexive reassurance. "Older," he said finally. "In ways I don't entirely understand. I know things I didn't know before. Small things. What mushrooms grow under which trees. Which birds mean rain. How soil smells before a frost." He looked at his hands again. "Things I've never learned. Things I have no reason to know. But they're in me now, like memories from someone else's life. Forest knowledge. The kind of knowledge that accumulated over decades of living close to the land." "The forest gave you something," Élise said quietly, "and took something in return." Werner looked at her without fear. 20 years, he said. "That seems like an uneven trade." "It always does," Élise said, "until you find out what the something is worth." She went to find the old woman. Not Madame Moreau. Celine's grandmother had been clear about her role, and despite everything, she didn't seem like someone who would set up a tourist to be aged by the forest. But someone had been at that trailhead. Someone who knew Werner's name. Someone with a Les Mères carving in her hands. The carving was the key. Those figurines weren't common objects. They belonged to the old families, passed down through generations. There were 12 families. 12 sets of such objects. She went back to the source. Père Guillaume was in the church garden when she found him. Not a large garden, just a square of herbs and one old rosebush, sitting on a stone bench with his breviary open in his lap and his eyes closed. He opened them when he heard her footsteps, showing no surprise. "The German tourist," he said. "Is everyone in this village psychic? No. We're just people who've learned to notice things. the pattern of arrivals at the clinic, the rumors that move through Café du Carrefour by noon, the particular look you get when you're pursuing something that unsettles you. He gestured to the other end of the bench. Sit. She sat. The garden smelled of thyme and old stone. Someone sent Werner Schmidt into a thin place, she said. An old woman at the trailhead, carrying a Les Mères figurine. She knew his name. She gave him a warning that was really a direction, something that made him feel expected rather than cautioned. You think she guided him to the thin place deliberately? I think someone wanted him to experience the forest's time, and I think it's connected to the pact, to the old families. She paused. What does the forest gain from aging someone? Why would it want someone's years? Père Guillaume closed his breviary. He had the careful stillness of a man choosing words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. The forest dreams, he said. You've heard that expression from the families. When it dreams, its time overlaps with ours. People who enter thin places during a dream. They experience both times simultaneously, the forest's ancient centuries and their own modern seconds. He looked toward the trees, visible above the church wall. But the forest isn't just dreaming. It's also learning. Every person who passes through a thin place leaves something, experience, knowledge, years. The forest absorbs it. Like feeding, like growing. The forest is alive in ways we don't have good language for. It grows not just in terms of wood and leaves, but in terms of understanding. Human understanding. Every generation, it learns a little more about us, about what we are, how we think, what we fear. And in exchange, the person takes something of the forest into themselves. Knowledge, usually, the kind that can't be learned, only absorbed. He looked at her. This isn't the first time Werner Schmidt has visited a thin place. His body tells a story. His body aged 20 years, which means he's survived something that should have killed him. The forest took 20 years and left him the rest. Père Guillaume looked at her carefully. In the old records, this is called a prise et don, a taking and a giving. The forest takes years, life force, time, and gives knowledge. Wisdom, you might say. The wisdom of old things. He paused. It's considered a blessing by the old families. Terrible and transformative, but a blessing. Werner Schmidt didn't ask for a blessing. No one asks. The forest chooses. Who chose for it this time? Someone put him at that trailhead. Someone made sure he was in the right place. The priest was quiet for a long time. There is a woman, he said finally. She has lived in the village's outskirts for a very long time. She tends the thin places, maintains them, makes sure the forest's hunger is directed appropriately, rather than allowed to take randomly. Her name. She is called La Femme Mères-Ombres, the woman of the trees. She has other names among the families. She was here when I arrived 40 years ago, and she looked then as she looks now. He met Elise's eyes. She's not a criminal, Inspecteur. She's a custodian who chose a tourist for the forest without his consent. Perhaps, or perhaps Werner Schmidt was always going to enter a thin place. Perhaps she only made certain that when it happened, the exchange was managed, that he came out alive. He looked at her steadily. 3 days ago, I prayed very hard for that man to return. So did every family who knows what thin places do to those they take. Without La Femme's care, he likely wouldn't have. Elise sat with that for a while. The old woman. The figurine. A knowledge she hadn't invited. Werner at the clinic, looking at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, carrying forest wisdom in a body that had paid for it in years. "Where is she?" Élise asked. "La Femme aux Arbres. At the forest's edge, on the eastern side. There's a stone cottage that most people walk past without seeing." He paused. "I would advise against confronting her. She has no reason to harm you, but she also has no obligation to explain herself to the law. Everyone has that obligation." "In theory," Père Guillaume said. "In Sombremont, theory and practice maintain a respectful distance." She found the cottage without difficulty, which surprised her, given what Père Guillaume had said about people not seeing it. It was exactly at the forest's edge, one wall stone, the other three sides ringed by ancient trees, as if the forest had grown up around the building rather than the building being built beside the forest. The garden was not decorative. It was full of things that had purpose: drying herbs, wooden frames with bark peeled back, clay pots with sealed tops, things she couldn't name. The woman inside opened the door before Élise knocked. She was old, very old. White hair pinned back from a face that had the particular weathered quality of someone who spent most of their time outdoors, winter and summer, for decades. Dark eyes, alert, assessing, entirely unafraid of the police badge Élise held up. "Inspecteur Valliere," the woman said. "I know who you are. And you are La Femme aux Arbres." The woman smiled slightly. "I am many things. Come in. I'll make tea." Inside, the cottage smelled of the forest, not the damp outside smell, but the interior smell, something living and green, despite the cold stone walls. Bundles of dried plants hung everywhere. The shelves were full of carved figures, sealed jars, notebooks with handwritten spines. They sat across from each other at a small table. "Werner Schmidt," Élise said. "Yes. You put him in the path of a thin place. I directed him to a trail that crossed one. There's a difference. Not to Werner Schmidt. He's 20 years older than he was 4 days ago." The woman folded her hands on the table. Her fingers were extraordinarily dexterous for her age, moving slightly, constantly, as if always working at something invisible. "Werner Schmidt walked into this forest carrying 30 years of grief," the woman said. "His son died when the boy was 9. A car accident. Werner has never stopped carrying that loss. He carries it in his body, in his back, in his jaw, in the way he doesn't quite breathe fully." Élise said nothing. The forest felt that grief when he entered. Old sorrow is something it recognizes. It has absorbed the grief of this region for 8 centuries. The woman looked at her steadily. "I didn't send him to the thin place for the forest's benefit. I sent him there for his. The prize Et Don takes years, yes. But it also releases what you've been carrying. Werner Schmidt came back lighter than he went in. Not younger, not unmarked, but lighter. That wasn't your decision to make." "No," the woman agreed. "But I've been making decisions like that for a very long time, directing the forest's hunger toward those who need what it offers, rather than letting it choose randomly. Because when it chooses randomly, it chooses the young, the unready, the ones who will break rather than transform." She looked at Élise with something like pity. "I know what happened to the Moreau girl, what Henri Laurent did. That was the forest's hunger without management, desperate, destructive. My work prevents that. By choosing victims for it, by choosing participants. There's a difference. Werner Schmidt didn't participate. He didn't consent." "No one consents to grief," the woman said quietly. "No one consents to loss. Werner walked into this forest carrying what he carried. The forest gave him something in exchange for some of his time. He will live his remaining years differently. I believe they will be better years. I can't arrest the forest, Élise said. But I could arrest you. For what? His aging is unusual, but not illegal in any statute I know of. He isn't harmed in any provable sense. He is different. The woman tilted her head slightly. What would you charge me with, Inspecteur? Élise looked at her steadily. She was right, which was infuriating. There was no law that covered what had happened to Werner Schmidt. There was no category for it. She could make a case for reckless endangerment. A creative prosecutor might try, but it would collapse the moment medical evidence failed to show injury in any conventional sense. Nothing, she said finally. Today. But understand something. I'm here now. And I'm watching. And the next time someone comes out of your forest older than they went in, I'll find a law that fits, even if I have to build it myself. The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something unexpected. Good. Élise paused. What? Good. The woman stood, went to a shelf, took down a small carved figure, 3 women with joined hands, and set it on the table between them. This village has needed someone watching from the outside for a long time, someone not bound by the pact, not obligated to the families, not afraid of the forest. You want me here. The forest wants you here. I told it about you when you arrived. She met Élise's eyes calmly. It's interested. You solve things that should stay unsolved. You push where others stop. And you don't run. She pushed the carving slightly toward Élise. Not a gift. Alone. For when you need guidance you can't find in your own world. Élise did not touch the carving. I find my guidance in evidence and logic, she said. For now, the woman replied. Epilogue. Werner Schmidt and his wife left Sombremont the following morning. Before they left, Werner came to the gendarmerie. Cotrin waited outside. He sat across from Élise's desk and looked at her with those clear blue eyes, now bracketed by 20 years more of lines. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer is strange. All right. The knowledge I have now, the things I know about the forest, about plants, about soil and sky and weather, I didn't have these things before. Where did they come from? Élise looked at him steadily. I think the forest gave them to you. In exchange for 20 years. In exchange for 20 years. He was quiet for a moment. Is that a bad trade? Élise thought about it honestly. I don't know. Ask me in 20 years. Werner nodded slowly. The woman who spoke to me at the trailhead. The old one. Will you investigate her? I've already spoken to her. And there's nothing I can charge her with under current law. The words felt inadequate. I'm sorry that's not more satisfying. It's what I expected. He stood, moved toward the door. Then he turned back. Inspecteur, the things I know now, I've been thinking about them. They're all about how to survive, how to find water in drought, which plants fight infection, how to predict storms, how to navigate by stars. He paused. It's not a tourist's knowledge. It's a villager's knowledge. The kind you'd need to live in this valley for a generation. Yes, Élise said. Which means the forest gave me knowledge for a life I'm not going to live. A life in this valley, near that forest. He looked at the window, at the trees visible in the distance. I keep thinking about what that means. After he left, Élise opened her notebook to the page marked Case 002, the disappeared. She wrote, Werner Schmidt, aged 20 years in 3 days. La Femme aux Arbres directed him to thin place. Motives ambiguous. Caretaker or participant in forest's feeding. Asterisk. Asterisk, no crime I can prove. No victim who claims harm. No law I can apply. Asterisk. Then, below. Asterisk Werner's parting observation. Forest gave him knowledge for a life he won't live. Why give something useless? Unless it's not useless. Unless the forest intends him to return. Asterisk. She closed the notebook. At her window, the forest waited. Patient. Old. Full of its own reasons. And somewhere at its edge, a very old woman sat in a cottage that most people walked past without seeing, turning a carved figure over and over in her hands, preparing for the next visitor who needed what only the forest could give. End of Episode 2. Next week, Episode 3, The Offering. A new resident ignores warnings and picks mushrooms from the forest without leaving an offering. The village says she brought it on herself. Élise says that's not how laws work. But the knocking that starts at her door every night doesn't care what Élise says. The Valliere Files continues.